What if I told you that beneath the endless, scorching dunes of a forgotten desert lies something that was never meant to be found? Something so terrifyingly precious that its original owners cursed the very sand that hides it. Imagine an expedition, heavily funded and completely off the grid, venturing into a wasteland where no human has set foot in millennia. They were not looking for tombs. They were not looking for ancient kings. They were tracking an anomaly, an impossibly dense signature buried deep beneath the earth, radiating an energy that defied every known geological model. This is the story of Omar Saleh and a discovery that was quietly erased from public records almost as soon as it was made. Listen to me closely. What you are about to hear is not a myth. It is a documented descent into an ancient nightmare. Omar Saleh was a man obsessed. While his peers spent their careers safely within the walls of prestigious museums, cataloging broken pottery and debating timeline theories, Omar was out in the merciless elements. He had spent decades deciphering fragmented texts from an empire lost to time. These texts spoke of a dark era, a period when the sun itself seemed to turn away from the earth, and the ruling elite resorted to unthinkable rituals to appease something lurking in the shadows. The texts mentioned a specific location, far west of any known civilization, a place described only as the mouth of the black sand. For years, the academic community mocked him. They called his theories the desperate delusions of a romantic. But Omar possessed something they did not: ground-penetrating radar scans from a classified survey that revealed a massive, unnatural void, hundreds of feet below the desolate surface. He assembled a specialized team, not just archaeologists, but deep earth structural engineers, linguistic experts specializing in dead dialects, and a private security detail. They ventured into the deep desert. The journey was brutal. The environment itself seemed actively hostile to their presence. Ferocious. Sandstorms battered their convoy, stripping the paint from their vehicles and clogging their filtration systems. The temperature fluctuations were violent, shifting from boiling heat during the day to freezing terror at night. But the most unsettling part was the silence. In this remote sector of the wasteland, there were no insects, no birds, no wind, just an oppressive heavy stillness that made the crew's ears ring. It took them 3 weeks of grueling excavation to reach the anomaly. What they found was not a buried pyramid or a sandstone temple. It was a perfectly circular shaft, plunging straight down into the darkness. The walls of the shaft were fused glass, as if the rock had been subjected to an intense, instantaneous heat. Pause for a second. Imagine being there. You are hundreds of miles from help. You are staring down into a black abyss that shouldn't exist, and the air wafting up from the depths smells like ozone and ancient dried blood. Most people would turn back, but Omar gave the order to descend. They rigged their rappelling gear and began the slow drop into the unknown. The descent took over an hour. The temperature, which should have dropped the deeper they went, inexplicably began to rise. The air grew thick, suffocatingly humid. When their boots finally hit solid ground, they ignited their high-lumen flares. The blinding white light pushed back the darkness, revealing a cavern of impossible proportions. But it was not a natural cavern. The walls were covered in chaotic, deeply gouged carvings. These were not the elegant, ordered hieroglyphs of a prosperous civilization. These were frantic, jagged symbols. A warning. The linguistic expert, a woman named Dr. Aris, began to translate the symbols as they walked deeper into the labyrinth. Her voice trembled over the radio comms. The carvings spoke of an entity, a devourer of light. It wasn't a god to be worshipped. It was a parasite to be contained. But here is where everything changes. As they pushed into the central chamber, their lights reflected off something that made their hearts stop. Gold, a staggering, impossible amount of gold. But it wasn't shaped into coins, jewelry, or royal death masks. The gold was molded into massive, twisted shapes, heavy, unnatural chains, thick, suffocating bindings, colossal spikes driven deep into the bedrock. It was a prison, and the gold wasn't meant as a tribute. According to the panicked carvings on the walls, gold was the only material dense and pure enough to hold the entity's frequency in check. The ritual objects scattered across the floor were not tools of worship. They were weapons, instruments of spiritual and physical containment. The team stood frozen. The sheer volume of the precious metal was worth billions. It was enough to rewrite history and collapse global economies. But the atmosphere in the room was suffocating. Several team members began to experience intense auditory hallucinations, whispers in the dead, stagnant air. The security detail reported seeing shadows moving just outside the periphery of their flares. The psychological pressure was immense. Omar, driven by a lifetime of obsession, approached the central altar. Resting upon it was the most intricate artifact of all. A solid gold sphere, roughly the size of a human torso, covered in thousands of moving, interlocking rings. It was a mechanism, a lock. As Omar brushed the dust from the surface of the sphere, a terrifying realization hit him. The rings were completely misaligned. The central seal was broken. The heavy gold chains that anchored the altar to the floor were snapped. The horrific truth dawned on the expedition. They hadn't discovered a sealed tomb. They had walked into a cage that had been broken open from the inside. Whatever the ancients had, sacrificed everything to lock away. Whatever required thousands of tons of pure, ritualistic gold to bind was no longer there. Or worse, it had been waiting in the dark for thousands of years for someone to open the door. Suddenly, the ground beneath them shifted. A deep, resonant hum vibrated through the bedrock, shattering two of their portable lighting rigs. Total darkness threatened to swallow them. Panic erupted. The team abandoned their equipment, scrambling back toward the glass-lined shaft. The ascent was a nightmare of tangled ropes, screaming radios, and the overwhelming sensation that they were all being hunted by something they could not see. They barely made it to the surface. When they did, a massive, unnatural sandstorm had already swallowed the horizon, bearing down on their camp with terrifying speed. They fled, leaving the excavation site to be swallowed once again by the unforgiving desert. Omar Saleh survived, but he never spoke of the expedition publicly. The official records were scrubbed. The radar anomalies were classified as equipment malfunction. But whispers remain in the darkest corners of the archaeological underground. They say that some of the smaller golden ritual objects made it out in the pockets of terrified crew members, objects that hum with a faint, sickening frequency. So the next time you see ancient gold shimmering behind the thick glass of a museum, ask yourself, was it crafted to honor a king, or was it forged to lock something away? And more importantly, where is the thing it was meant to hold?